From AccuWeather.com, this is AccuWeather Daily, a brief host-read article. It's weather news in a nutshell. Lake Powell has fallen to its lowest level since the reservoir began filling more than 60 years ago, pushing one of the Colorado River's most important reservoirs closer to a critical threshold for hydroelectric power generation. The elevation of the water level on Lake Powell dropped to 3,519 feet above sea level over the weekend, slipping below the previous record low set back in April of 2023. That's according to the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. The reservoir, which straddles the Arizona-Utah border, is now more than 20 feet lower than it was at the beginning of this year. The historic low comes only days after Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the U.S., also dropped to record low territory. Water levels on Lake Mead, which sits along the Arizona-Nevada border behind Hoover Dam, fell below 1,041 feet in early August and has continued to decline. Federal projections placed the reservoir near 1,039.8 feet by mid-August. The simultaneous declines are another sign of the mounting strain on the Colorado River, which provides water for more than 40 million people across 7 states, 30 tribal nations, and Mexico. The river also supplies irrigation for millions of acres of farmland and generates hydroelectric power at major dams throughout the basin. Of the two reservoirs, Lake Powell is approaching one of the most consequential benchmarks. The reservoir is now only about 30 feet above the minimum elevation needed for Glen Canyon Dam to generate hydroelectricity normally. At an elevation of about 3,490 feet, water would no longer be able to pass through the dam's turbines as designed, threatening a source of electricity for customers across the Southwest. That threshold is different from what water managers call dead pool. Lake Powell would have to fall much farther, to around 3,370 feet, before water stored in the reservoir could no longer flow normally through the dam's lowest outlet works. Federal officials warned earlier this year that significant intervention could be needed to keep Lake Powell above the minimum power pool if dry conditions persist. The falling water has already changed recreation around Lake Powell. Some boat ramps have closed or been relocated as the shoreline retreats, and marinas have been moved toward deeper water. The record lows follow a poor snow season across the upper Colorado River Basin, where mountain snowmelt supplies much of the water that eventually reaches Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Persistent drought, rising temperatures, and decades of water use exceeding the river's available supply have steadily depleted the system. A particularly dry winter provided little relief, and limited spring runoff accelerated Lake Powell's decline through the summer. Short-term rainfall from the North American monsoon can slow reservoir losses in some areas, but it cannot replace the widespread mountain snowpack needed to substantially replenish the Colorado River system. There are hopes that the strengthening El Niño will bring a stormy winter to the Southwest and the Colorado River Basin, but it may be only temporary relief. It will take multiple wet and snowy winters in a row for there to be a significant replenishment of both reservoirs and ease concerns of water availability for hydroelectricity production. The latest records come as federal officials and the 7 Colorado River Basin states negotiate how the shrinking river will be managed after existing operating rules expire. The Bureau of Reclamation released a final environmental review in late July outlining a framework that could result in substantial reductions in Colorado River deliveries to Arizona, California, and Nevada through 2036. Combined cuts could reach as much as 3 million acre-feet annually under some conditions, although the amount would depend on reservoir levels and other factors. Cities across the Southwest have spent years preparing for tighter supplies by storing water underground, limiting outdoor irrigation, recycling wastewater, and developing alternative sources such as desalination. Now, those efforts are becoming increasingly important as the 2 reservoirs that serve as the Colorado River system's largest storage banks sink into territory not seen since the dams that created them were relatively new. The combined amount of water stored in Lake Powell and Lake Mead is now near levels last seen in the 1950s, before Lake Powell existed and while Glen Canyon Dam was still being built. With Lake Powell continuing to hover only a few dozen feet above its hydropower threshold and Lake Mead still declining, another dry winter could put even greater pressure on water managers to conserve what remains in the Colorado River system. That's all for now. You can find regional forecasts and science-based articles at AccuWeather.com, and you can stay weather aware with the AccuWeather app. Enjoy the rest of your day. Be safe. I'll be back tomorrow with more from AccuWeather.